Hey guys, it's Danny. Today it is the 1st of March and well, it is time to recap the orchids we had in bloom for the month of February. Time is flying, isn't it? But first, let's go back to January and see who is the winner as chosen by you guys, and look at that. It is a Phalaenopsis, it's the beautiful Anaconda, and I absolutely agree, she's one of the most beautiful orchids that I have. Let's see if she can compete with all of the other orchids we have in bloom this month, because oh boy, we have a ton of new species, first time bloomers for me. So without further ado, let's get to it because we have 27 orchids to go through today as well. Before we start though, let me remind you that you can vote for your favorite one in the straw poll down below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a like, and why not subscribe? I post 3 times a week. And with that said, on with the orchid show. I'm actually gonna start with the 2 species that I'm most excited for this month. First, we have the Gongora quinquenervis. This is an orchid I purchased last year and I was not expecting it to bloom so profusely after just 1 year. There's always a period of adjustment, especially with species or with orchids that I've never had before. Well, this one didn't take any break. She produced tons of beautiful, luscious new growth, and take a look at those flower spikes. It had about 15 flower spikes, it's still going, but the thing is, the flower spikes are not all in sync, so instead of having a big bloom show, I ended up having flower spikes opening sequentially, which I don't know if I like. Yes, I extend the blooming period, but at the same time, I'm more into the grand explosion of blooms type of a show. Anyway, the good news is the orchid is very easy to grow. She's very vigorous. The bad news is the flowers do not last. Gongoras, Stanhopias, bucket orchids, even Astaneras, they're not known for having long-lasting flowers, quite the opposite, and this one is no different, sadly. But for the 5 days or so in which the flowers look good, you will have an amazing show. That's Kylie in the other room. You will have an amazing show and quite a pleasant scent. I can see how this is not for everybody. It's a sweet, spicy, heavy type of a scent. If you keep this orchid in a small room, it can be overwhelming. I can see that. I personally really enjoy it. It reminds me slightly of orange peels. It's sweet but bitter at the same time. I guess that's the best way to describe it. So it's up to you to discover it. I really love the orchid. She's a big orchid though. I have to find a good place for it because I actually broke one of the flower spikes. They're very tender and I kind of always stumble on it, so I have to find a place on a very high shelf for it in order to protect it. And yeah, stay tuned for a care tutorial on it when it blooms next. I want to allow myself quite a lot more time to learn more about it, and then yep, you can be sure I'll make a tutorial on it because it's worth it. Next up, we have the Bulbophyllum mastersianum. This is one of the orchids that got caught up in transport last year. It spent about a month, I believe, in transport, time in which it's seriously dehydrated with all the lockdowns and the postal services not operating at full potential, which they still don't. Yeah, sadly this orchid was caught on transport. I am very happy that I managed to save it, and behold, it is also blooming. It's not blooming on the new growth. The new growth it produced since last summer is very tiny, it's set back. This flower comes from a back bulb, which Bulbophyllums can do. They can produce flowers on older bulbs, but the orchid herself is recouping. She has roots, everything is going great, and yeah, that flower, I love it. It looks a lot like my daisy chain hybrid, but it has a different color scheme. So you can imagine the more growths I get on this orchid, the better the show would be. Bonus, it's not a stinky Bulbophyllum. If you smell the flower, it has a little bit of a swampy type of smell. It's not pretty, it's not perfumey, but it's not bothersome, it's not strong, and you honestly sense it only if you smell the flower. It's nothing you have to put up with because it's just not strong enough, and it's absolutely worth it because the flower is gorgeous, and of course it has a mobile lip, and if you shake a little bit the flower, you will see it. Downside is, again, not a long-lived flower, pretty much like the Gongora. It lasts for about 5 days or so and then it starts to get droopy. With these beautiful orchids, I guess you have to enjoy them while they last, but they're absolutely worth it. Next up, another premiere. Here is Laelia lundii. This is my first rupiculus Laelia that I managed to rebloom. However, it's mislabeled. It was supposed to be the Cerulean variety, and yeah, it's an alba. It's completely white. Even though this is the first time this orchid blooms, I was thinking maybe the first flower will not show the full potential, but then all of the other flowers opened. They're pure white. I'm pretty sure it's an alba, so something got mixed up with the tagging there, but it's okay because the orchid is tiny, it's dainty, it reminds me of snowbells, and it is fragrant. It's not very powerful, you can detect the fragrance only if you smell the flowers, but it's nice, sweet, vanilla-ish. I was not expecting it. Somehow when I read up on this orchid, I missed the note about the fragrance. But yeah, it is a fragrant orchid. I love it. These Laelias are absolutely adorable. It's like a miniature Laelia purpurata, actually. Next, we have another species. This is Dendrobium harveyanum, which produced quite a nice flower spike this year. I didn't even have to chill it way too much. This is the type of orchid that is supposed to get a little bit of a winter rest. And really, since I'm moving around stuff in the greenhouse for the past 5 months at this point, I didn't really focus all that much on providing my dendrobiums with proper rests. I'm doing my best right now, but yeah, he didn't receive a rest. I just stopped fertilizing him when growth stopped, but it was enough to trigger blooming, and look at those flowers. This orchid reminds me of dandelions, smells like dandelions in my opinion. It's not a very strong scent, but I absolutely love it. I love fringy flowers. Next up, we have a mislabeled Prosthechea. This one I purchased as a hybrid between Prismatocarpa and Vitellina. And I guess if you know those two species, you know this can never happen when you cross those two species. This can only happen if you have the Prosthechea cochleata in its parentage, which I suspect I do. And they have spots, so I do have a funny suspicion this is the Prosthechea Elfin. If you search pictures, it does look a lot like it. So I'm gonna call it like that for now, but still I'll call her a NoID as well, because since the tag was wrong, I really don't know for sure. But she's a very, very hardy orchid, blooms really, really nice. And if you cannot find the cochleata, this one is just as pretty. It's not a sequential bloomer though. So the bloom show lasts for about a couple of months or so, which I do believe it's enough. There's not much of a fragrance, if at all, really, but she's a beautiful orchid and I really like it. Next up we have Dendrobium Berry Oda, and if you are thinking, where was this guy last year? He was missing. You know why? Because I didn't give it a winter rest. I wanted to see what would happen, and guess what happened? It didn't bloom. Surprise, shock and awe, not really. Since this is a quinquenervis hybrid, it does inherit its traits. So even though it's not as difficult to rebloom as the quinquenervis is, at least for me, quinquenervis was pretty hard, it still needs a little bit of a cool down in the winter, still needs no fertilizer. I didn't do any of that last year just to test it out, and it didn't bloom. Like at all. Well, this year I gave it a little bit of a rest together with the harveyanum. Nothing very cold. They're actually sitting on the same shelf, which is very low, close to the floor. No fertilizer, water just enough to maintain it hydrated and not super shriveled like a raisin, and poof, flowers. And I really like the bloom show. I actually have a care tutorial on this orchid, which is pretty old at this point, but it's still good. I'll link you to it down below in the description. I wasn't sad I didn't have it in bloom last year. It's more important for me to test out, let's say, the limits or the validity of statements in general. Well, I can tell you for a fact, the Dendrobium Berry Oda does need a little bit of a rest. Next up, we have the Rhyncholaelia glauca. This is not a first-time bloomer. I always have her in bloom around this time of the year. She smells delightful in the nighttime. I can see how some people would hate the scent. But if you've ever had nighttime smelling flowers, I guess you will recognize the fragrance. I'm not gonna say it's jasmine-y because it smells like a particular type of jasmine. All of the other jasmines to me either smell like mushrooms, but in the nice way, either like honey. So it's more of a soapy, perfumey, detergenty, but in the good way type of a scent. It is, however, very, 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 very strong. So I would not recommend this to scent sensitive people. It's really gonna kick you out of the room at night. I think the next one to make a spotlight on is this one for sure. Next, we have some Paphiopedilums. This is the American hybrid, which is one of the more common Paphiopedilums you can find sometimes, or many of the times here in Europe, even in flower shops. He's a green-leafed Paphiopedilum, which is super, super easy to grow. And this year I have 2 flowers from 2 different fans. The thing is, one of the fans is actually much older than the other, well, 1 year older, but it decided to produce a bloom at the same time with its offspring. Let's put it like that, which doesn't always happen, but hey, glitches can happen sometimes. Anyway, if you're interested in knowing how to care for slipper orchids, I do have a beginner-friendly tutorial, which I will link you to down below. Next up, we have another slipper orchid. This is Paphiopedilum Judge Philip, which is a hybrid of the Philippinensis. If you're older on my channel, you might remember I had the Philippinensis, I lost it, it withered off. I don't really know exactly why or what happened. Maybe I left some water in the crown by mistake at some point when I treated it for spider mites. I'm not entirely sure. It slowly withered off, which is a shame, but I do have its hybrid, which looks very, very similar to him. He's a sequential bloomer. He's a very big orchid though, but I do really enjoy the flowers, and flowers actually last a lot. The first flower it produced lasted for a month, and as you can see, there are quite a few more buds on the way. It is a very rewarding orchid if you have space for it. Next up, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, we have the Trichopilia suavis, which makes me so happy because I love it. Now, I was very hesitant to purchase myself some more Trichopilias because my first experience with one of these wasn't good. But I have a feeling there was something wrong with the individual I got because it was very, very frail. This one is not. This one is pretty vigorous, and this year it bloomed for the first time for me. I have it for about a year or a little more than a year. And I treat it pretty much like an oncidium, really. And the first 2 flowers that it created this year are its first flowers ever. It is a young orchid which can produce more flowers than this as it grows. And I can tell you that the flowers are really, really pretty in real life. They're huge, very delicate, very elegant. People say they're very, very fragrant. Now that I have comparison terms with other orchids, I wouldn't say that. I think they are moderately fragrant. They're flowery, rosy in scent, but really not as sweet as roses, I find. I have some Cattleyas which smell exactly like roses, so comparing this one to those, it's not really the same. But it's a very fresh scent. I don't think it's very bothersome, and I think it's absolutely worth it because just look at the flowers, they kind of match my nails. And that contrast between white and pink and yellow, it is dreamy. I do really want some more Trichopilias. Next up, here we have Cattleya Chester, which this year decided to produce 2 buds, but the second bud opened after 2 weeks from the first flower. I don't know what happened. But anyway, the Chester is a Sophronides hybrid, so it used to be called Cattleya Chester, and it's a pretty tiny Cattleya orchid that has one of the most vibrant orange colors you've ever seen. It is absolutely beautiful, blooms reliably around this time of the year for me. I don't keep this one very hot actually, I keep it in my greenhouse. I don't think it's as sturdy as other Cattleyas, so I tend to baby it a little bit, but she's doing quite fine in the greenhouse. There is no fragrance, but definitely fits in pretty much any shelf. Next up, we have a bunch of jewel orchids. First off, the Ludisia discolor, the classic one that has those really dark purple velvety leaves with shimmery veins. This orchid is mainly grown for its foliage, but when it blooms, I have to say it's not all that bad. The flowers themselves, not necessarily the showiest, but the way they're displayed and the sheer number of them makes this orchid very, very elegant when it's in bloom. The flowers are held upright, and to me it inspires more field flowers. Well, this is a terrestrial orchid, so it makes sense that the flowers are held up rather than leaning to one of the sides, but I will have to tell you, as the flowers emerge, they will lean towards the light source. At least with the Ludisia alba, which you're seeing on the screen right now, it's what happened. So I kind of had to rotate it a little bit. I grow them under artificial light on my little table. This one was not sitting centered, so I had to rotate it a little bit to get the flower spike completely straight. It seems to move throughout the day and throughout the night actually. Through the night it kind of straightens itself up. It's a very active flower spike. Once the flowers open, they don't lean anymore and I can place them anywhere. But yeah, jewel orchids are mainly grown for their foliage. I really don't dislike the flowers though, and I'm sure there are a whole lot of you who really enjoy the flowers of this orchid. Next up, we have the Epicattleya René Marqués, which is one of my favorites, and this year I could have had 3 flower spikes. Instead, I only have 1, and this is because she was pretty badly attacked by pests a few months ago. I treated it, but in the process, the sheets that were very tiny and just forming managed to rot, which happens from time to time. Now I know better, and I will keep a better eye on it. She is a bit of a magnet for pests, which is pretty weird for a Cattleya type, but not so weird for an epidendrum. Epidendrums, they're magnets. Cattleyas barely have any issues with pests. But I am happy to enjoy a flower spike. The colors really are so pretty in reality as well. There is no fragrance, and the orchid is quite tall, but I believe she's worth it. Next up, we have a Vanda. This is the Viboon Sunset, which is a pretty reliable bloomer, blooms multiple times a year. I think we had it in bloom just a few months ago. She's a pretty fast grower for being a Vanda, and she blooms pretty often, as I was saying. And since I feel like we saw her at least 2 or 3 times last year, I'm not gonna insist on it, but she's a really bright orange colored Vanda. Next, we have a first-time bloomer. This is a NoID pink Vanda. Not entirely sure if it is the Princess Mikasa pink or the Pachara pink. Anyway, it is the orchid that Martina, my viewer, sent me in order to give a better environment, hotter, more sunny environment, and I'm so happy to be able to bloom it. And look how pretty those blooms are. I do love a bright magenta color. That's why I'm not entirely sure if she's a Pachara, because I did have a Pachara which was not this brightly colored, so she might be something else. It's a flower shop orchid and probably comes from Anko, which is quite a popular Vanda nursery here in Europe. Let's see some Phalaenopsis. Here we have the Sogo grape, which is one of the reddest, or actually the reddest Phalaenopsis that I have. This is a strange little orchid. She seems to always bloom in the winter time. She seems to either be triggered by the lower temperatures, either, I don't know, that's when she wants to bloom. But she is a Polychilus hybrid, looks like a Polychilus. We can call her one of the novelty hybrids. So I'm not entirely sure if I should call this a summer bloomer or not. I try to keep her as warm as possible and she blooms, but she always blooms now in winter. Anyway, there is a bit of a fragrance. It's a little fruity, nothing like the Bellina. I discovered no other hybrid or other Polychilus type smells quite like the Bellina, but she is a joy because of the color. And with these flowers, I'm not really interested in the fragrance, to be honest, but fragrance would have been a bonus. Next, we have another Phalaenopsis. This is the mini Mark, which I recently purchased a few months ago. It is one of the most iconic, I believe, Phalaenopsis hybrids because there aren't many pure orange Phalaenopsis. Do you see that lip? It is pure orange. Not to mention, those little dots on the white flowers are just spectacular. I actually found a nail polish which looks very much like the mini Mark. It's a little milky and has orangish specks in it, so I'm gonna wear it at some point and show you the resemblance, but I purchased it because it reminded me about the mini Mark. Anyway, most of you already know this orchid. It's pretty popular even in flower shops. Most of the times you'll find it at orchid nurseries. Some say that some mini Marks have a fragrance. Mine never did. I had 3 at this point in 8 years or 9 years or however many years. I'm starting to lose count at this point. But yeah, I guess there's always hope. Then we have Phalaenopsis anaconda. Will not stick around too much with it. She opened a few more flowers, has a few more buds, and for a Polychilus, she is long lasting. The flowers last, I think the oldest flower is 2 months at this point. Mind you, yeah, I know flower shop Phalaenopsis last longer, but that's a whole different story. We're talking about Polychilus here, which are very, very different. So for what she is, the flowers seem very long lasting for me. There's also a fragrance which is a lot more spicy, smells like anise to me, and that's pretty cool. But yeah, the pattern and the colors are everything on this orchid. Then we have the Phalaenopsis Yaphon Cupid. And this is an orchid I will talk about in a different video. I purposely left the old flower spike, the one from last year, on it together with a seed pod forming just to kind of prove a point that these structures will drain energy from the orchid and the next flower spike might be smaller. Well, the new flower spike it has this year is much smaller than any flower spike it ever did, which gives a visual representation of why I always cut flower spikes on Phalaenopsis. I don't let them branch out, continue blooming, drag on for years and years, because I do find that the show is much better when you let the orchid have its vegetative growth, cut away all of these drainage sources, and then let her put all her energy into new flower spikes. At least this is my preference. Flowers are flowers. If you like them, hey, you can do whatever you want. I like showiness, and I can be without flowers for an entire summer and autumn. Anyway, this is a slightly fragrant orchid. I really like it, and I really like the color. This year we're not gonna have such a great show, but it was on purpose at least. Next up, oh boy, the Quedlinburg. We just recently talked about it. This is one of the Oncidiums we saved in that repotting 20 Oncidiums video. Yeah, look at the length of that flower spike. It is 1 meter long, which is ridiculous, particularly because the orchid is not fully recovered. But she can handle it. I'm a bit surprised, I will tell you. The pseudobulbs are not as big as they should be, but the flowers are there. I do have a feeling that I'm gonna cut the flower spike pretty soon, put it in a vase if I want to enjoy it, and just let the orchid breathe a little bit, recover a little bit. She's not 100% recovered, and this is a flower spike that a fully recovered orchid should produce. So I'm not gonna let it stick around, but I have to say it is quite impressive. Flowers are big. It's an impressive hybrid. Next up, let's look at some Cattleyas. Here we have my NoID yellow Cattleya that I have for quite a few years at this point. One of you lovely people sent it to me, and no, it's not the alba key. I know it looks a little similar, but trust me, it's very, very different. Now, I did get an idea, I believe is the closest one that I got so far. It looks very similar to the Cattleya or former SLC Rosemary Clooney, and I think the variety is Nane, which I will have to say it does look very, very close. Obviously, there's no way to know, since it is an orchid that looks like about a million others. It's a yellow Cattleya with a reddish type of lip. It has a nice peppery fragrance, really. It's a little nicer than the Alisaras, and the colors are beautiful. I wish I could tell you the name so you could search it, but it is a flower shop orchid. I think I did see it in flower shops, and as you know, they don't have a name tag. Next up, here we have an orchid that I do have an ID for because it has a tag. This is the Trick or Treat, and look at the abundance of flowers. This is the type of orchid which does produce quite nice bloom shows. Each flower spike can carry multiple flowers, and if you treat it right and it has energy, then it will put on a beautiful orange show. There is no fragrance. I do believe the Guarianthe or Ranthiaca is in its parentage, which is not a fragrant orchid. So all of these orchids which do have this clustered blooming type of a pattern, most of them I find they don't really excel in the fragrance compartment. The ones that are very big flowered, floofy flowered, those are typically the ones with the best fragrance. But these guys have the showy bloom show. Approaching the end of today's video, here we have the Ceratostylus rubra. I know it has been renamed to Ceratostylus retiscu, something that you will see on the screen. I just can't right now. This is my hidden gem, the beautiful, very underrated little orchid that has a very unique growth pattern and produces a lot of beautiful orange flowers. She's very easy to grow. I will make a video on her pretty soon. She does bloom multiple times a year. This is the second bloom streak that I have. I think the first one was a couple of months ago, and then throughout the summer she grows vegetatively, and it's in the winter I find that she blooms most. She's not fragrant, but if you can imagine a big bush of this orchid full of orange flowers, that's a pretty nice image to have. So I'm looking forward to her growing up. She grows kind of slow, so I'm looking at quite a few years ahead of me, but it's okay. I enjoy the journey. Next, we have a new orchid, Locartia. Okay, you have it again on the screen. It's late when I'm recording this. It's actually very late. I started to work late at night as well because I just don't have time, and I discovered I'm not as productive at night. Shocker. But yeah, one must do what one must do. So this is an orchid that I purchased a few months ago, and it keeps blooming. Each, how should I say, stem, let's call it a stem, produces nice globular type of inflorescences at the end. And the flowers are just the cutest thing. They are naturally pendant, as you can see. They're yellow. They don't have a fragrance as far as I can tell, but the look of it, the entire orchid, is so unique. You wouldn't say it's an orchid, and it's one of those orchids that can pass as a houseplant easily, and the fact that it blooms, it's a great bonus in my opinion. So again, I'm looking forward to it gaining a little bit more mass, getting a little bit more massive actually is what I wanted to say, and having a better bloom show. But for an orchid that I have for like more than a couple of months, 3-4 months at this point, I think she's doing great. Now, 2 orchids that are a bit of a fail. So first off, sadly, Dendrobium Berry Oda. This is the flower spike. As you can see, part of it is yellowing. It's not going to open. I only have a few flowers on it, but it's okay. It's a younger orchid. It is the first time it blooms, so I'm gonna work a little more. He's gonna work a little more. We're gonna figure it out. Anyway, sadly, yeah, we don't have a great show this year, and I do believe that next year I will try to be more consistent with light. I kept moving it around the last year, trying to figure out the best position. Articles suggest it's a lower light type of plant. I disagree. I don't know, it's just how I feel the plant. All of these orchids that have needle-like leaves to them, in my opinion, they're kinda higher light. I might be wrong, but I will try to provide higher light in the following year and see if that makes a difference. For now, we're just gonna have to do with the tiny few little flowers in the hope that I shall do better next year. And the last orchid we're gonna see today is another fail. It's not a fail from the orchid, it's a fail from me. Here we have my Paphiopedilum, which again, I almost crown rotted. I changed this location since last year. Guess what? Rain got to it again. And not only that, I completely missed the bloom of this orchid. I kept putting off filming it, and what do you know, the flower is already out by this point. But I do have some pictures on my Instagram. P.S. If you follow me on Instagram, I post daily at this point because I do have new orchids opening kind of every single day. So if you want to see these orchids in advance, minus the care tips, you can follow me on Instagram and you'll see them there. And with this particular orchid, I do have pictures of its flower in full glory. Now, this is the very popular Darwin orchid, and yeah, I need to do much better because I was not a good mom last year. So I think starting fresh, good repot, brand new location. I'm keeping this orchid outside. It does benefit from that drop in temperature a little differently than Phalaenopsis. I think the difference between day and night does it for this particular plant. So I do have to fight a little bit the elements sometimes, but I do have in plan or in mind a brand new location for it. So yeah, next year will be better, hopefully. We'll see about that. But this year I completely spoiled the bloom display. But hey, what to do, there's always next year. And that's about it for today. I do hope this video is not very long. I completely lost track of time recording this voiceover. It looks like I've been recording for the past hour. That's never a good sign. I'm gonna have to chop this video and remove details. But anyway, I do hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope some of these orchids made it to your wish list. Don't forget to vote and let me know in a comment which of these orchids sparks your interest the most. And with that said, I hope you have a great day. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And I'll see you all next time. Bye!